Welcome into the DFS Den. It's Dave Eddy here again, aka Corporal Eddy on Twitter, talking to you about the wild card round showdowns. Right now, we are talking about the Cowboys against the Buccaneers. I think this could be an exciting game. Definitely could be a high-scoring game. So for showdowns, that makes it a little bit more interesting. I think we all prefer, to see more points, more yards. It makes the game a lot more exciting, gives you a lot more options to play as well. Let's talk some things about Showdown. They are clearly not the same as your typical main slate lineup like my normal videos are. We're talking about a showdown here, so the format itself is just drastically different. You've got a captain spot. In that captain spot, you have the player at 1.5 times the salary of what he would be in the flex. But to compensate for that, he scores 1.5 times the points as well. So correlating that captain spot pretty much around the rest of your lineup really makes a lot of sense. The main thing that I'm thinking about for showdown lineups is, I want to think, how's the game going to go? What's the flow of the game going to be like? What's the result going to be? So if I'm thinking here that, Buccaneers get out to a big lead and, Cowboys, have to chase, then I'm probably going to be, building my lineup to represent that. If I think it's going to be, a high-scoring game that's close, then again, I want to build my lineup to represent that. So high scoring probably means pass catchers and quarterbacks are super popular. So that's where I'd be, looking to build. If I think it's going to be a low scoring matchup, then maybe I'm a little bit more apt to, look at running backs, or in those cases, kickers and defense could come in really handy. So there's a lot of things to think about. It's a lot different than building for, your main slate lineups. You've got the captain spot, you've got the 5 flex spots, you've got to have a minimum of at least 1 player per team. So at least, 5 and 1. And yeah, so it's very much a correlation game. It's very much a game theory kind of a setup, even more so than, your standard lineup. So let's go ahead. Let's pop in here. Let's talk about the captains that I'm interested in. Now, who's going to make my lineups is one thing, but the captain pool for me are the guys that, I think you should consider. Looking at Tom Brady, Chris Godwin, Dak Prescott, Mike Evans, CeeDee Lamb. So no real surprises here. You could talk me into Tony Pollard. You probably could talk me into Dalton Schultz, but just for the purposes of this, I don't think that's where I'm going to be going. I'm going to be going with the guys that I had mentioned. I think that they're all pretty safe bets to be viable for an optimal captain. Now, when I'm playing a quarterback in the captain spot, unless they're very mobile, so, your Josh Allens, Justin Fields, Lamar Jacksons, those type guys, if they're just a traditional pocket passer, which is what I would consider Brady, that's what I would consider Dak, then when they're in the captain spot, if they're going to be optimal, it's because, they're having a really big game and they're going to be carrying, multiple pass catchers along with them. So if I'm playing either one of these guys in the captain spot, I'm looking to stack them with 2 pass catchers. Obviously, a wide receiver or a tight end qualifies for that. Depending on, the player, you can also classify some running backs as well. In this particular matchup, even though we do have some pass catching backs, these teams have enough wide receivers and tight ends that I like, that I'm not gonna include them into this pool. So if I'm stacking, if I'm putting Brady as my captain, White and Fournette are not going to be forced in. I'm not saying that they can't be with them, but I'm going to want 2, actual, pass catchers. So when it comes to pass catchers in the captain spot, so in this case, Lamb and Godwin, Evans, when I have them in the captain spot, I do want to put their quarterback in the flex. Again, if one of these guys is going to have a big game, odds are the quarterback is doing fairly well, and the quarterback very much is in play to be optimal from the flex spot. Anybody else, any other position, which doesn't really apply here, but if you were playing Tony Pollard, for example, I wouldn't necessarily force any correlation there. If you wanted to, force like the Cowboys defense in there, that would be understandable, but I don't think that the Cowboys defense is a great play here. They're definitely in my player pool. We'll talk about that later, but definitely not in my captain spot here for the player pool. All right, let's talk quarterbacks specifically. Almost always both quarterbacks are in play. A lot of times I will force at least one quarterback in per lineup. A lot of times it'll naturally work out that way, but I like to put the rule in place just to ensure that I don't have a rogue lineup that comes through. This would be an example where I probably want to have at least one of these quarterbacks in every single lineup, be it at captain or be it at flex, doesn't matter to me. But both of these guys, again, neither one of them, are really going to do anything with the legs. I mean, Dak a little more than Tom Brady, obviously, but Dak's clearly not a runner. So just like in the captain spot, if I'm playing him in the flex, I'm setting a rule that says I need to have at least 2 pass catchers with these guys. Now, I'd be a little more lenient, having him in the flex to, allow a Pollard or allow a Fournette or a White in there, maybe even Zeke, but not so much. I still would shy away from it, but if I play either one of these guys, either captain or flex, I am going to force, 2 pass catchers because that's the only way I think. That's not the only way, but that's the main way that they're going to be optimal. So speaking of quarterbacks, so going back to the captain spot real quick, if I play either one of them quarterbacks in the captain spot, I do exclude the kicker from that team from the same spot. And the reason for that is if the quarterback is having a big game, that means they're scoring a lot of touchdowns. If they're scoring a lot of touchdowns, what are they not doing? They're not kicking field goals. So I don't think that a kicker is very well correlated with a quarterback captain. So the opposing team, their kicker, that's fine. But if I've got Tom Brady in at captain, I don't want any Ryan Suckup in those lineups. So something to think about there, guys. Let's go running backs. Now, there's going to be a wide player pool here that I'm interested in because both of these teams are good and both of these teams are deep. So I'm going to have, 2 running backs from each team here. Typically, I do that anyways, but there's not really much thought here into not including any of these guys. So Pollard and Zeke are in play for me. Fournette and White are in play for me. Now, every slate's different. So, one rule that I typically have is 1 running back per team as a max for Showdown. In these cases, the workload gets split up enough where I could argue that you could eliminate that rule. I could see Pollard and Zeke in the same lineup working out. I could see Fournette and White in the same lineup working out. I don't really think that this is the type of game where I'm going to allow that. Usually for me, when I allow multiple running backs from the same team to be in the same lineup, it's because it's going to be very low scoring. I'm expecting a 13-10 type game where there's not going to be a lot of points on the board. And so, you really don't want to limit yourself too much. Here, I think this is going to be more along the lines of a 31-28 type game. So I'm more interested in pass catchers than I am in running backs, even though, again, pretty much all 4 of these guys can catch passes. But, that's where I'm looking. I'm probably leaning more Leonard Fournette than anyone. Part of that is just, the price and what I think is going to happen. I see Fournette getting, somewhere in the 15-point neighborhood, 12 to 15. And, he's coming in at what? He's coming at 7,200. I don't think that's a bad price. Rachaad White is a little bit cheaper, 5.4. So, what, $1,800 cheaper. But I don't expect more than about 7 to 10 points from him. So, I'm leaning more Fournette than anything. And then I'm leading Pollard over Zeke. Pollard just got a much higher ceiling. Zeke's got the chance, obviously, to get in the end zone more likely, but I definitely like Pollard here a little bit more. And let's get on to wide receivers. Now, wide receivers again. I like a lot of people in this matchup. Like I said, 2 good teams that are very, very deep. So usually, 3 wide receivers per team is depending on the team and depending on the matchup. But 3 wide receivers is usually kind of a given, maybe a 4th depending on the team. Both of these teams, I'm liking 4 receivers. So for Dallas, I like Lamb, I like Gallup, I like Hilton, I like Noah Brown. I think, because of the varying prices there, I think all of them are in play. I think you could make an argument to play any of them. Same thing with Tampa Bay. Evans and Godwin, obviously. Russell Gage, his price makes him interesting. And even Julio Jones, his price makes him interesting. So I'm interested in all these guys. And I think that in my lineups, I'm not going to see a heavy dose of anybody. Probably all of these guys will be at 50% or less. And now that's not considering, the flex, like, a CeeDee Lamb, for example. probably going to have somewhere in the 75% neighborhood between captain and between, flex for him. And then the other guys, probably somewhere in the 40%, 50% neighborhood for like Godwin's and Evans. And then the rest of the guys will just trickle in as I see fit. None of them are, a super value to where I think I'm going to play a lot of them to make other things work. I mean, I think that they all have a decent price, but nothing stands out to me as, wow, I kind of have to play this guy. All right, then we get to tight ends. Tight ends on this slate are kind of interesting. I do like the two main tight ends for each team. I like Schultz. I like Cade Otton. I really like Cade Otton's price. He's only coming in at 1,800, and I think he's the pass-catching, tight end here. Now, granted, he hasn't had, he's been under 4 points for the last 4 games, and he hasn't scored double digits in the last 5. So, it's a little iffy there, but the volume has been there. He's had at least 5 targets in 3 of the last 5 games. And, I'm going to chase volume, especially in this matchup where, I think Brady's going to throw the ball a lot. I mean, I know he's thrown the ball a lot this year, but I don't think that's going to stop. And I think that this game, like I said, is going to score points. So at $1,800, I'm very interested in Cade Otton. Honestly, he's probably going to be my highest exposure player on the slate. CeeDee Lamb's probably going to be right around there as well. Brady's probably going to be right around there as well. But, I mean, those are guys that I'm going to be heavy on. And I do like Dalton Schultz. It's just he's so much more expensive. He's coming in at 6,400. And, I think Otton is going to be the guy that's going to be the way that I'm going to, try to save money from a skill position because nobody else is cheap. And he's the guy who is. And I'm not saying he's going to have, a slate breaking type game, but, at 1,800, if he got me 15 points, that'd be amazing. But if he got me 10, that'd be fantastic as well. So probably throw in a little Jake Ferguson as well. I don't know if I'll actually use him anywhere, but, if I really wanted to build some sort of a stud-filled lineup, he's only $200. And so, he's not putting up a whole lot of points here, but even if he gets you 3 points at $200, I think that he's worth it. And then kickers. Kickers are exclusive to Showdown. We don't have them on the normal main slate. And kickers can be very valuable for a couple of reasons. Number one, they're not too expensive. They're usually in the $3,500 to $4,500 price range. So, they're not gonna break the bank. They also can score you some points. You can get double-digit points from a kicker. It's not too drastically uncommon. Now for Ryan Suckup, I'm not really expecting it there. Brett Maher's definitely got a much better chance. I mean, hell, he's scored double-digit points in 4 of the last 5. Excluding last week where all he did was miss an extra point. So, you get a higher potential here from Maher, but with kickers, never play him in the captain spot. I mean, maybe a rare exception for Justin Tucker in a game that I expect to be 12-9-ish, where he could be optimal. But other than that, very, 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 very rare I'd ever consider a captain kicker, let alone actually play it. But in the flex, absolutely in play. I set a rule, only 1 kicker per lineup. Again, unless it's one of those games I'm expecting, 17-9, type game where, a kicker could be one of the higher scoring players on the slate. In which case, then I would consider 2 kickers. But in this kind of matchup, I'm looking at just 1 kicker at max. I'm not saying there's going to be a kicker in every lineup, but a max of 1 kicker. And then that brings us to defenses. Defenses here are going to be very similar to kickers for me. Their price can vary a little bit more. Like in this example, the Buccaneers are only 3,400, but the Cowboys are up to 48. Now, that makes sense. Cowboys have a much better defense than the Buccaneers do, especially for fantasy here. In DFS for defenses, we're not really looking so much for, how few points a team gives up. We're looking for sacks. We're looking for turnovers, and touchdowns are a gold mine. So, Cowboys get a whole bunch of sacks. They create a lot of turnovers, and they can definitely get in the end zone as well. So with how much Tampa Bay is going to be passing, I think that the Cowboys defense is interesting. It's just their price tag, makes them difficult. Similar to the kicker, you know, I don't play a lot of captain defenses because it's not too often that they're optimal, but in the right matchup, which again, I don't consider this to be one, but in the right matchup, it could work. You know, back in the day, whenever the Cowboys played the Texans a few weeks back, that was a matchup where I thought that the Cowboys defense was viable at captain. Obviously, that didn't work out. You know, defense is extraordinarily volatile, but you know, it's possible. But again, unless the matchup is dictating to where, you know, I think both defenses together could both be optimal, I stick to a maximum of one per lineup. In this case, again, I think that it's going to be a fairly high-scoring game, which doesn't mean you can't play defenses because, again, we're looking for sacks, we're looking for turnovers, but I'm not super interested in either one of these defenses. But I'm not saying you can't play them. If I do, it probably won't be more than, I don't know, 10 or 15%. So that's what I'm thinking here on this game. I hope you learned something. I hope you got some information on this that you think will help you. If so, pop on over here, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so yet, and then come on over here and check out the showdown video that I made before the season. That'll kind of break down everything in theory, you know, not just about this particular game. So I appreciate you tuning in. I wish you the best of luck on these showdowns, and I hope you enjoy the playoffs.